I am Jillian, 32 years old, a financial analyst living in Boston with what looks like a successful life on paper. Good job, nice apartment, and I help my family financially whenever they need it. But somehow I am still the disappointment, the one who never quite measures up. Last Christmas dinner, my mother looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You are the most useless child we have." The table went silent. In that moment, something inside me finally broke free. Before you hear what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button for more stories about standing up for yourself. Growing up in Westfield, Pennsylvania, our family seemed picture perfect from the outside. A middle-class suburban neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns and community barbecues every summer. My mother Karen ran our household with military precision. My father Howard buried himself in his accounting work. My older sister Melanie was the golden child destined for medical greatness. And my younger brother Jason was the athletic star. Then there was me somewhere in the middle, never quite fitting the mold my mother had designed. From early on, the pattern was clear, when I brought home straight. As in 6th grade, my mother glanced at the report card and said Melanie had all, as plus extra credit. When I won 2nd place in the state art competition at 14, the painting was hung in the hallway, until Jason won his first football trophy, which immediately claimed the prime spot on the living room mantel. My achievements were stepping stones for comparisons, never celebrations in their own right. My childhood bedroom walls were covered in academic certificates and art competition ribbons that nobody in my family ever really looked at. While my mother attended every single one of Jason's games, rain or shine, she made it to exactly 2 of my dozen art exhibitions throughout high school. "I have more important things to do than look at doodles," she would say, while spending hours creating elaborate scrapbooks of Melanie's pre-med journey. The most painful memory came during my high school graduation. As valedictorian, I gave a speech that received a standing ovation from the crowd. Afterward, my English teacher approached our family with tears in her eyes, telling my parents how my words had moved her. My father checked his watch impatiently, while my mother smiled tightly and said, "She has always been good with words. Too bad she is not putting that skill toward law school like we suggested." That was the moment I decided to study finance instead. A small rebellion, but it was mine. My mother had planned out my entire educational path toward becoming an attorney like her brother, my Uncle Roger. When I announced my decision to pursue finance at Boston University, her disappointment was palpable. "Finance is for people who could not get into law school," she said over dinner, causing my 16-year-old brother to snicker, while Melanie gave me a pitying look. College became my escape. Boston was far enough away to breathe, to discover who I was without the constant comparisons. I flourished in my finance classes, securing internships that my professors said were typically reserved for graduate students. I made the dean's list every semester and graduated summa cum laude. My graduation ceremony was attended by my father and brother only. My mother had an important charity function, and Melanie was studying for medical school exams. After graduation, I landed a position at a prestigious financial firm in Boston. The decision to stay there rather than return to Pennsylvania was met with accusations of abandonment. "Family should stick together," my mother said during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "But I guess we know where your priorities lie." The irony of her statement became apparent as the years passed. Despite the emotional distance, I became the family financial safety net. When Jason's startup athletic equipment business needed capital, I provided a $20,000 loan. When Melanie struggled with medical school application fees, I covered the costs without being asked. And when the recession hit and my parents faced potential foreclosure, I was the one who helped with 6 months of mortgage payments. Every time they needed financial assistance, the calls were brief and businesslike. Thank yous were rare, and the loans were never discussed again. It was as if my money was acceptable, but my presence was not. The distance between us grew measured not in miles, but in unspoken resentments and conditional acceptance. By the time I turned 30, I had been promoted twice, purchased my own apartment in a beautiful Boston neighborhood, and built a life I was proud of. My mother still introduced me to her friends as my daughter, who does something with numbers in Boston. When pressed, she could not accurately describe my job title or accomplishments. Meanwhile, Melanie was my brilliant daughter, the surgeon, and Jason was my son, the entrepreneur. The pattern was set, but I still tried. Birthday gifts, holiday visits, regular financial support when needed. I kept hoping that someday my achievements would be enough, that my worth would be measured by something other than my mother's impossible standards. As December rolled around last year, the familiar dread of holiday obligations settled in my stomach. The annual Christmas dinner at my parents' house was an exercise in emotional endurance that left me exhausted for days afterward. Still, I bought my plane ticket from Boston to Pennsylvania, wrapped thoughtful gifts for everyone, and prepared my standard responses to the inevitable questions about my lack of husband and children. The week before Christmas, my mother called with her usual list of demands disguised as requests. "We need you to contribute for the holiday dinner. Everyone else is bringing something homemade, but since you cannot cook, just send money. $500 should cover it." No greeting, no questions about my life, just the assumption that my contribution would be financial rather than personal. I transferred the money immediately, then spent another $1,000 on gifts I hoped might finally elicit genuine appreciation. For my father, a rare first edition of his favorite author's work. For Melanie, an expensive stethoscope she had mentioned wanting. For Jason, high-end athletic equipment for his store. For my mother, a designer handbag she had been hinting about to Melanie, thinking I did not listen to such details. The drive from Boston to Pennsylvania gave me 5 hours to mentally prepare. I rehearsed bland responses to invasive questions, practiced neutral expressions for backhanded compliments, and reminded myself that it was just 3 days. 3 days of walking on eggshells, then back to my peaceful apartment and supportive friends. When I pulled into my parents' driveway on December 23rd, my mother was standing on the porch, arms crossed, a critical eye, already assessing my appearance. "You look tired," she said instead of hello. "And your hair is too short for your face shape. Did you lose your stylist's number?" I swallowed the retort that rose to my lips and carried my bags inside, where my father briefly looked up from his newspaper with a nod before returning to the sports section. Jason was sprawled on the couch watching football, and Melanie was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice carrying as she described a complicated surgery to an impressed colleague. "Jillian, take your things to your old room." I gave the guest room to Melanie since she needs proper rest after her hospital shifts. My mother instructed, though Melanie had not worked a hospital shift in weeks, being on holiday break like everyone else. My old room had long ago been converted into my mother's crafting space, with just a twin bed crammed in the corner as an afterthought. My childhood belongings had been boxed up or discarded years ago, replaced by my mother's scrapbooking supplies and sewing machine. Even the walls had been repainted from my chosen blue to a pale pink that matched her crafting aesthetic. That evening, the extended family arrived for pre-Christmas drinks. Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, gave me a warm hug and whispered, "You look wonderful, dear. Boston clearly agrees with you." Her husband, Uncle Roger, asked thoughtful questions about my work, nodding with genuine interest at my responses, until my mother interrupted to direct him toward the adult drinks in the dining room. My cousins, Amanda and Scott, arrived with their spouses and children, creating the chaos of family reunion that somehow always excluded me from its center. During dinner preparation, I offered to help in the kitchen, only to be assigned the task of setting the table, while Melanie and my mother prepared the important dishes. "Try not to mix up the salad and dinner forks this time," my mother said, referencing a mistake I had made as a teenager that had somehow become family legend. "Remember, we have guests with standards." Later, as we all gathered in the living room, the conversation turned to Jason's business. "It is really taking off now," he boasted, conveniently omitting the fact that his success had been built on the foundation of my investment. "I am thinking of opening a second location next year." "That is my entrepreneurial son," my mother beamed, patting his hand, always reaching for more. When the topic shifted to Melanie's medical career, the praise flowed even more effusively. "She just got offered a position at Johns Hopkins," my mother announced, though Melanie looked uncomfortable with the exaggeration of what had actually been a preliminary interview. Eventually, someone politely asked about my work. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Jillian is still doing her number thing in Boston. Still single, still no prospects for grandchildren from that one. But we have accepted that some people just take longer to figure life out." I felt Aunt Patricia's sympathetic glance, but kept my expression neutral, as I had trained myself to do over years of such comments. The evening continued with similar undercurrents, every interaction layered with subtle reminders of my place in the family hierarchy. Later that night, Jason cornered me in the hallway. "Hey, so things are a little tight with the business this month. Inventory costs, I was wondering if you could float me another loan. Just $10,000. I will totally pay you back this time." It was the third such request this year, none of the previous loans having been repaid. I hesitated, and he quickly added, "Unless pushing papers at your desk job does not pay as well as you pretend." I transferred the money that night, telling myself it was the last time, knowing it probably was not. As I lay in the too-small bed in what was no longer my room, I wondered why I kept coming back. Why I kept trying to buy the approval that never seemed available at any price. Christmas Day arrived with the forced cheer and underlying tension that characterized all our family gatherings. The house had been transformed into a holiday showcase worthy of a magazine spread, my mother having spent weeks perfecting every detail. The 12-foot tree in the living room was adorned with heirloom ornaments arranged by color scheme, not a single one placed by childhood hands or carrying sentimental rather than aesthetic value. The dining table was a masterpiece of holiday perfection with fine china crystal glasses and an elaborate centerpiece of poinsettias and candles. Name cards placed each person strategically, with my seat positioned directly across from my mother, making me the constant recipient of her disapproving glances. And far from Aunt Patricia, the one person who might have provided some buffer. The extended family arrived at precisely 2 o'clock. My mother having specified the time down to the minute in her invitations. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Roger brought expensive wine. Cousins Amanda and Scott arrived with their picture-perfect families in coordinated Christmas outfits. Several of my mother's friends from her charity committee joined us, as did some of my father's business associates, all of whom had known me since childhood and were eager to assess my progress against their expectations. "Jillian, you remember the Thompsons," my mother said, steering me toward an older couple. "Their son Gregory is a partner at his law firm now, still single too. Such a shame you two never connected." The implication was clear, as it always was. If only I had followed her plan and become a lawyer, I might not be the family's singleton disappointment. As we took our seats for dinner, my father carved the turkey with methodical precision, while my mother directed the passing of side dishes with the authority of an orchestra conductor. The conversation flowed around safe topics. Initially, the recent snowstorm, community gossip, holiday travel plans. Then my mother's friend Beverly asked Melanie about her medical career, and the familiar pattern emerged. 15 minutes of detailed praise for Melanie's accomplishments, followed by 10 minutes celebrating Jason's business acumen with pointed comments about how he had built it all on his own, through hard work. The generous loan from his sister was apparently not part of that narrative. When the conversation finally turned to me, it was with the perfunctory politeness reserved for topics of minimal interest. "And Jillian, are you still at that same company in Boston?" someone asked. Before I could answer fully, my mother interjected. "Jillian has always been comfortable with stability. Not everyone has the drive to advance quickly, like Melanie and Jason." The fact that I had received 2 promotions in 3 years and now managed a team of 6 analysts somehow never made it into her description. I took a large sip of wine and reminded myself of the breathing techniques my therapist had recommended. The dinner continued with similar microaggressions wrapped in holiday pleasantries. Every time I began to share something positive about my life, the conversation was redirected or minimized. When I mentioned the major account I had recently secured for my firm, my father responded by immediately asking Jason about his latest sales figures. As the main course plates were cleared and dessert was being prepared, the conversation shifted to family finances, a topic that always created tension. My cousin Scott mentioned the expensive private school his children attended, which prompted my mother to lament the cost of education. "We sacrificed everything for our children's education," she said, conveniently forgetting that I had paid my own way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, while Melanie's medical school had been partially funded by our parents, and Jason had dropped out of community college after 1 semester. Speaking of education costs, my brother interjected with false casualness. "I am thinking of taking some business courses next year. Really elevate the store to the next level." My mother beamed at him. "That is wonderful, Jason. Always investing in yourself. Yeah, he continued, glancing at me. Might need a little help with tuition, though. The implication was clear. Another loan would be expected from me, the family bank, who was simultaneously not successful enough to earn their respect. My father joined in. Your sister can help you out. Not like she has children to save for college for. Something inside me tightened at the casual assumption that my resources were family property while my achievements remained unacknowledged. I remained silent, pushing my pie around the plate without eating it. Jillian has always been good with money, my mother said, her voice carrying that particular tone that preceded her backhanded compliments. Of course, there is more to life than just accumulating wealth. Family children making a real difference in the world like Melanie does, saving lives, or Jason bringing joy through sports. I looked up from my plate. I believe my work makes a difference too. The table went quiet at my unusual act of self-defense. My mother's eyebrows rose. Pushing papers and moving numbers around on spreadsheets. I suppose someone has to do it. I manage investment portfolios that help people secure their futures, I said quietly. It matters to them. Well, my mother said with a dismissive wave, we cannot all be special, can we? Every family has their average child. Aunt Patricia inhaled sharply. Uncle Roger suddenly became very interested in his napkin. My father cleared his throat but said nothing in my defense as usual. I should have let it go as I always did. Should have smiled tightly and changed the subject. But the accumulated weight of years of such comments suddenly felt unbearable. What exactly would make me not average in your eyes? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. My mother seemed surprised by the direct question but recovered quickly. Perhaps if you had followed through with law school instead of taking the easy route. Or if you had given us grandchildren. Or contributed something meaningful to the family beyond just existing. The wine had loosened her usual filter, but the sentiment was nothing new. It was just rarely stated so explicitly. I contribute, I said quietly. Yes, you show up for Christmas. Congratulations. Her tone was scathing. I meant financially. I have helped this family numerous times. My mother's face flushed. My father suddenly became very interested in refilling wine glasses that did not need refilling. That is what family does, she said dismissively. Besides, Melanie and Jason have real expenses. Medical school. Business costs. You just have yourself to worry about. I have been saving to buy a house, I said, surprising myself with the admission. At your age, I had 3 children and a house, my mother replied. But I suppose some people mature more slowly. The tension around the table was palpable now. Guests were exchanging uncomfortable glances, clearly wishing they were elsewhere. Mom Melanie interjected, trying to smooth things over. Jillian has a great career. A career is not a family, my mother replied. Though I have accepted that Jillian will likely never give us that joy. Karen, Aunt Patricia warned, perhaps this is not dinner conversation. But my mother was on a roll now, years of disappointment flowing freely. No, let us be honest for once. Every family has their disappointment. The child who just never quite measures up. She turned to me, eyes cold. You are the most useless child we have. Always have been. The table went completely silent. Even the children stopped fidgeting. All eyes darted between my mother's flushed face and my stunned expression. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. A lifetime of swallowing such comments, of making myself smaller to fit their expectations, of buying affection that was never forthcoming, suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. I placed my napkin carefully on the table and stood up slowly. Then, stop calling me when you need money, I said quietly. The silence that followed my statement was absolute. My mother's face transitioned from righteous indignation to shock, her mouth opening and closing without sound. My father froze with his wine glass halfway to his lips. Jason suddenly found the pattern of the tablecloth fascinating, while Melanie stared at me with wide eyes. I remained standing, surprising myself with how calm I felt after years of suppressed emotions. Since I am so useless, I assume you will not need the $20,000 I loaned Jason last year for his inventory problems. Money he never repaid. Or the $5,000 I sent Melanie to cover her medical school application fees when you and Dad said you could not afford it. Melanie's face flushed. That was supposed to be between us, she hissed. Why, I asked. Are you ashamed of needing help from your useless sister? Jillian, sit down. My father finally spoke, his voice strained. This is Christmas dinner. Yes, it is Christmas. The season of appreciation and gratitude. Yet, I cannot recall the last time anyone in this family expressed either toward me. My voice remained steady, though my hands trembled slightly at my sides. My mother recovered her voice. You are making a scene over nothing. Families help each other. That is what we do. No, what we do is take and take from me while simultaneously making me feel worthless for not living up to impossible standards. I turned to face the entire table. Did you know that during the recession, I paid my parents' mortgage for 6 months? $36,000 that was never mentioned again, never repaid, never acknowledged. Aunt Patricia's eyebrows shot up as she looked at my father. Howard, you told me you refinanced. My father could not meet her gaze. It was a temporary situation. Or, how about the $12,000 for Jason's bail and lawyer when he got that DUI last summer, I continued. The one the family pretended never happened. Jason's girlfriend turned to him with shock written across her face. You told me you never had a DUI. It was no big deal, Jason muttered, still not looking up. It was a big deal to my bank account, I replied. As was the down payment for Mom's car 2 years ago when her credit was too poor to qualify for the loan herself. My mother's face had gone from shocked to furious. That is enough, Jillian. How dare you throw these things in our faces when we have given you everything? Given me what exactly, I asked quietly. A childhood of constant criticism. A lifetime of feeling like I would never be good enough. The privilege of being your personal bank while being treated like a disappointment. We put a roof over your head, food in your mouth, clothes on your back. My mother listed, her voice rising. That is called the legal obligation of parenthood, I replied. And I have more than repaid any debt in that department. By my calculation, I have given this family over $100,000 in the past 5 years. All while being treated as if my only value was my checkbook. The stunned expressions around the table told me that few had known the extent of my financial support. My mother attempted to regain control of the situation. No one asked you to do those things, she said dismissively. Actually, everyone did ask. Directly, repeatedly, with sob stories and guilt trips and family obligation speeches, I looked around the table. What no one ever asked was how I was doing, if I was happy, if I needed anything. Not once. This is ridiculous, my mother snapped. We talk about your life all the time. No, you criticize my life choices all the time. There is a difference. I turned to my father. When was the last time you asked me anything about my work beyond whether I got a raise? He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to recall a single instance. And you? I looked at Jason. When was the last time you called me for anything other than money? He had the decency to look ashamed. Even you, Melanie, I continued, turning to my sister. You call to vent about your problems or brag about your successes, but you have never once asked about mine. That is not fair, she protested weakly. It is entirely fair, Aunt Patricia unexpectedly interjected. I have watched this dynamic for years and said nothing which makes me complicit, but Jillian is right. This family has taken her for granted in every possible way. Stay out of this, Patricia, my mother snapped. No, I think I have stayed out of it for too long, Aunt Patricia replied firmly. Your other children are wonderful, Karen, but so is Jillian. She has built a successful career, supports herself completely, and has apparently been supporting half the family as well. Yet I have never once heard you express pride in her accomplishments. The table fell silent again, as my mother struggled for a response. I am not asking for special treatment, I said into the silence, just equal treatment, equal respect, equal acknowledgement. But since that seems impossible, I will settle for no longer being this family's emotional punching bag and financial solution. So what, you are cutting us off? Jason asked, finally looking up. Over one comment. This was not one comment. This was the final comment in a lifetime of comments. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. And yes, the Bank of Jillian is officially closed. If that makes me even more useless to this family, so be it. My father finally found his voice. Let us all calm down and enjoy our dessert. It is Christmas, for goodness sake. Yes, it is Christmas, I agreed. And I am giving myself the gift of self-respect this year. I stepped away from the table. Thank you for dinner. I will be returning to my hotel now, and to Boston first thing tomorrow. You are staying at a hotel? My mother asked, momentarily distracted from her anger. Why would you waste money on a hotel when you have a perfectly good room here? A crafting storage closet with a bed is not a room, I replied. And, as we have established, I am apparently quite wasteful and useless anyway. I walked toward the doorway, then paused and turned back. For what it is worth, I have always loved this family, flaws and all. I just cannot keep pretending that the feeling is mutual. As I grabbed my coat and purse from the front closet, I heard chairs scraping behind me. Aunt Patricia appeared at my side. I am proud of you, she said quietly, giving my arm a squeeze. And for what it is worth, I always have been. The simple statement, the first genuine expression of pride I had heard all day, brought tears to my eyes that I quickly blinked away. Thank you, I whispered. Call me tomorrow, she said. We will have lunch before you leave town. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, and slipped out the front door into the cold December evening, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than I had in years. The drive back to the hotel was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my chest felt constricted in a way that made each breath an effort. I made it to the hotel parking lot before the emotions finally overwhelmed me. Sitting in my car with the engine off, I broke down completely, years of suppressed feelings pouring out in gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping. 15 minutes passed before I could compose myself enough to enter the hotel lobby, keeping my head down to hide my red, swollen eyes from the cheerful front desk staff, wishing guests a Merry Christmas. Once inside my room, I collapsed onto the bed, emotional exhaustion making my limbs heavy. My phone, which I had silenced during dinner, showed 12 notifications when I finally looked at it. 3 missed calls from Melanie, 2 from my father, 1 from Aunt Patricia, and 6 text messages. I scrolled through them with trembling fingers. Melanie, how could you do this today of all days? You ruined Christmas for everyone. Mom is crying. Jason, dude, that was intense. But I get it. I should have said something. Sorry. Father, your mother is very upset. Please call when you calm down. Aunt Patricia, so proud of you for standing up for yourself. Call me anytime. Melanie again, Mom says she never wants to speak to you again. Was that your goal, breaking up the family? Mother, the most surprising of all? After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us. By humiliating me in front of everyone, I raised an ungrateful child. I turned off my phone without responding to any of them. The narrative was already being rewritten, as it always was. Somehow I had become the villain of the story, rather than someone who had finally stood up after years of mistreatment. The familiar guilt began creeping in, the lifetime of conditioning that made me question whether standing up for myself was allowed. I ordered room service, though I had no appetite, and turned on the television to fill the silence. A Christmas movie played, showing a perfect family gathering with laughter and loving glances. I changed the channel immediately. Around 9 o'clock, the hotel phone rang. Few people knew I was staying there, which meant it was likely family. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Jillian, it is Aunt Patricia. I hope you do not mind me tracking you down. The front desk was reluctant to put me through until I mentioned I was your aunt. It is okay, I said, surprised by how hoarse my voice sounded. I wanted to make sure you are all right. What happened today was long overdue, but still difficult, I am sure. I feel horrible, I admitted, and liberated, both at once. That sounds about right, she said with a gentle laugh. Listen, what you did took immense courage. The aftermath is always messy when someone finally disrupts a dysfunctional pattern. They think I ruined Christmas. You know what? Maybe you did ruin their version of Christmas. The version where everyone pretends everything is fine while you silently endure being the family scapegoat. Good for you. Her validation brought fresh tears to my eyes. I never meant to keep track of the money, I said quietly. It just started adding up, and I realized no one ever even said thank you. The money is a symptom, not the cause, Aunt Patricia said wisely. It is about respect and recognition. You could have given twice as much, and it would not have fixed the underlying issue. We talked for nearly an hour with Aunt Patricia filling in some family history I had never known. How my mother had always felt inadequate beside her own high-achieving sister. How she had transferred those insecurities onto her relationships with her children, measuring our worth by external markers she could brag about to others. It does not excuse her behavior, Aunt Patricia said firmly. But sometimes understanding the origin helps you take it less personally. After we hung up, I changed my flight from the 27th to the next morning, eager to return to Boston and the life I had built there. I packed my suitcase methodically, leaving out only what I would need in the morning. Sleep evaded me for most of the night. I kept replaying the dinner scene, sometimes with satisfaction, at finally speaking my truth, other times with crushing guilt at causing a family rift on Christmas. The lifelong programming that made me responsible for everyone else's feelings was hard to overcome. In the morning, I drove to my parents' house early, hoping to retrieve my gifts and say goodbye when few people would be awake. My plan failed when I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, her face showing evidence of a sleepless night. We stared at each other for a long moment before she spoke. "I suppose you have come to apologize," she said, her tone making it clear that was the only acceptable reason for my presence. "No," I said quietly. "I came to get my things before my flight." Her lips tightened, running away as usual. "I am not running away. I am returning to my home, my job, and my life." I moved toward the living room where I had left my gifts. So that is it. Years of family bonds broken over one comment made in the heat of the moment. I turned back to face her. It was not one comment. It was a lifetime of comments, criticisms, and comparisons. And the bonds were already broken. Yesterday just showed me they may never have been whole to begin with. Families fight, Jillian. They say things they do not mean. That is part of life. "Did you not mean it?" I asked directly. "Do you not think I am the most useless of your children?" She looked away without answering, which was answer enough. "That is what I thought," I said, gathering the unwrapped gifts I had brought. "For what it is worth, I do not think I am useless. I have built a good life, helped my clients secure their futures, and until yesterday, supported my family in every way I could. If that is not enough for you, that is your loss." My father appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of discomfort and concern. "Jillian, this has all been blown out of proportion. Your mother was stressed about hosting. You know how she gets." "I do know. I have known my entire life. And I have spent that entire life making excuses for how she treats me." I looked between them. "I am done with that now." "So, you are just cutting us off?" my father asked, the financial implications clearly at the forefront of his mind. "I am establishing boundaries. There is a difference." I headed for the door with my arms full of the gifts I had brought. If there ever comes a time when this family can treat me with the same respect given to Melanie and Jason, I will be here. Until then, I need some distance. "You will regret this," my mother called after me. "Family is all that matters in the end." I paused at the door. "That is the point, Mom. I have never felt like I fully mattered to this family." The drive to the airport was quiet, my thoughts finally settling into a strange calm. As the plane took off, I watched Pennsylvania grow smaller beneath me, the complicated emotions of the past 24 hours starting to distill into something like resolve. By the time I landed in Boston, I knew that whatever happened next would be different from everything that had come before. The weeks following Christmas were strangely quiet. My phone, usually buzzing with family requests and complaints, remained largely silent. Jason sent one text asking about reconsidering the loan situation, which I did not answer. Melanie called once, leaving a voicemail that fluctuated between guilt-tripping and tentative understanding before ending with "Mom is still really hurt, just so you know." My father sent a check for $500 with a note saying, "Returning your Christmas dinner contribution," as if that token amount somehow addressed the larger issues at hand. I donated it to a local food bank. My mother maintained radio silence, though. Aunt Patricia, who had become my unexpected ally, reported that she was telling everyone who would listen about her ungrateful daughter, who abandoned the family at Christmas. January brought not just a new year, but my first session with a therapist. I had resisted therapy for years, convinced I could handle my family dynamics on my own. Sitting in Dr. Eliza Warner's softly lit office, I finally admitted how exhausted I was from the effort. What you described is a classic family scapegoat dynamic, Dr. Warner explained after I recounted the Christmas dinner incident. One child becomes the repository for all the family's disowned problems and inadequacies. But why me? I asked. What did I do to deserve that role? Nothing, she said firmly. Scapegoats are often the family members with the most empathy, the ones willing to accept blame to keep the peace. Sometimes they are simply the ones who remind a parent of qualities they dislike in themselves. Over the next several sessions, we explored the patterns that had defined my family relationships, how I had become the emotional and financial support system without receiving support in return, how my achievements were minimized while my perceived failures were magnified, how I had internalized the message that my worth was tied to my usefulness to others. Setting financial boundaries will be an important first step, Dr. Warner suggested. It is often the most concrete way to begin establishing healthier relationships. That opportunity came sooner than expected. In late January, Jason called with another loan request, this time for expanding the business. I know Christmas was rough, he said, his voice carefully casual, but that was Mom being Mom, you know. No reason for it to come between us. For the first time in our adult relationship, I said no. I am not comfortable continuing to provide loans that are never repaid. I explained, my heart pounding, despite the rehearsals with my therapist. Seriously, you are going to hold a grudge over family helping family. His tone shifted quickly from friendly to accusatory. This is not a grudge. It is a boundary. There is a difference. Whatever. I guess we know who you really are now. He hung up without saying goodbye. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. I called Dr. Warner, who talked me through the discomfort of standing firm when family systems resist change. The pushback is normal, she assured me. They are trying to restore the familiar dynamic. Your job is to maintain your new boundaries until everyone adjusts to them. February brought a surprise visit from Aunt Patricia, who came to Boston for a weekend. Over dinner at my favorite restaurant, she provided updates on the family situation. Your brother had to take out a bank loan for his expansion, she reported. He was furious about it, but honestly, it is probably better for his business to have official documentation anyway. And Mom, I asked hesitantly. Still angry, still hurt, still unwilling to acknowledge her role in the situation. Aunt Patricia sighed, but there has been an interesting development. Your father has been more vocal lately about your accomplishments. Really, I could not hide my surprise. Yes, last week at their dinner party, someone asked about you, and instead of the usual vague response, he actually mentioned your recent promotion and that article where your firm was featured. Karen changed the subject quickly, but it was noticeable. The small acknowledgement meant more than it should have, revealing how starved I had been for parental recognition. March brought an unexpected email from Melanie, more thoughtful than our usual communications. I have been thinking about what you said at Christmas, she wrote. About how none of us ask about your life. I realized you are right. I talk about my work constantly, but never ask about yours. I am sorry for that. If you are willing, I would like to know more about what you actually do as a financial analyst. It was a small olive branch, but I appreciated the effort. Our subsequent phone call was slightly awkward, but more balanced than any conversation we had shared in years. By April, I had settled into a new routine. Weekly therapy sessions, a stronger focus on friendships that were mutually supportive, and a commitment to recognizing my own accomplishments rather than seeking external validation. I joined a painting class, reconnecting with the artistic passion my mother had dismissed, and found joy in creating without judgment. At work, I developed a mentor relationship with Diane, the firm's vice president, who recognized my talent and pushed me to pursue opportunities I might have previously considered beyond my reach. You undervalue yourself, she observed during one of our meetings. Your financial models are innovative, yet you present them as if you are expecting criticism rather than recognition. Her words hit home, illuminating how my family dynamics had infiltrated my professional life. With her encouragement, I began speaking up more in meetings, taking credit for my ideas and pursuing a leadership role I had been hesitant to consider. In May, my father called out of the blue. Our conversation was stilted at first, both of us unsure of the new terrain. Your mother and I have been discussing things, he said finally. She is still upset about Christmas, but I told her that some of what you said had merit. Thank you for acknowledging that, I replied, careful to keep my expectations measured. I should have been more aware of how things were for you growing up, he continued. I focused on work and left the parenting to your mother. That was a mistake. It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from him. Not quite taking responsibility, but at least recognizing there had been a problem. Would you consider coming home for your mother's birthday next month, he asked. It would mean a lot to her. I took a deep breath. I can consider it, but I need to be clear that I will not accept the same treatment as before. If there are any comments about my life choices or comparisons to Melanie and Jason, I will leave. He was silent for a moment. That seems fair, he said finally. The call ended with tentative plans and cautious hope. That night I wrote in the journal Dr. Warner had suggested I keep reflecting on the changes 6 months had brought. The distance from my family, while painful, had created space for growth I had not known I needed. I was painting again, building deeper friendships, even considering dating after years of avoiding relationships. Most importantly, I was learning that my worth was not measured by my usefulness to others or my ability to meet impossible standards. It existed independently of external validation, a concept so foreign it still felt revolutionary. June arrived, and with it, a decision about my mother's birthday. After careful consideration and several therapy sessions, I decided to attend, but to stay at a hotel rather than my parents' house, giving myself the option of retreat if needed. The visit was awkward but lacked the usual undercurrent of hostility. My mother was civil though distant, accepting my gift with a tight smile and minimal thanks. Jason avoided financial discussions entirely, a welcome change, even if motivated by self-interest rather than respect. Melanie made visible efforts to ask about my life, though her questions sometimes revealed how little she knew about what I actually did. The most significant moment came when one of my mother's friends commented on how well I looked. "Boston must be agreeing with you," the woman said kindly. Before my mother could respond with her usual dismissive comment, my father interjected, "Jillian is doing extremely well there. Her firm was just featured in the Wall Street Journal for their innovative approach to sustainable investing. She led that initiative." My mother looked startled, my siblings surprised. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Is that right?" the friend asked, genuinely interested. "Yes," I said, seizing the rare opportunity to share my success. Our team developed a model for environmental investments that outperformed traditional portfolios by 6% last quarter. The conversation that followed was the first time I could remember my professional accomplishments being discussed with actual interest at a family gathering. My mother remained quiet, but she was listening, her expression unreadable. Later, as I was preparing to leave for my hotel, she approached me alone in the hallway. "Your father seems very impressed with your work," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Thank you," I replied, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I still think you would have made a good lawyer," she added, unable to fully embrace the life I had chosen. I smiled slightly. "I think I make a better financial analyst." She nodded once, not quite agreeing, but not arguing either. It was the closest thing to acceptance I had ever received from her, a tiny crack in the wall of disapproval that had defined our relationship. As summer turned to fall, the family dynamic continued its slow, sometimes painful evolution. Jason repaid a small portion of his outstanding loan. Without being asked, a gesture that spoke volumes. Melanie invited me to an important medical conference where she was presenting, making an effort to include me in a significant moment rather than simply reporting her achievements afterward. My father called more regularly, our conversations gradually becoming less awkward, as we found common ground in discussions about investments and market trends. A neutral territory where we could connect without emotional landmines. My mother remained the most resistant to change, still prone to comparative comments and backhanded compliments. But even she seemed to be making incremental efforts, sending an article about Boston's financial district with a brief note saying, "Thought you might find this interesting." By the time the holidays approached again, I had built a life that felt authentically mine. My apartment was filled with my paintings, my weekends with friends who valued me for myself, not my usefulness. I had taken on greater responsibilities at work, earned another promotion, and begun mentoring junior analysts the way Diane had mentored me. The question of Christmas loomed, bringing with it echoes of last year's confrontation. After much consideration, I made a decision that prioritized my well-being, while leaving the door open for continued healing. "I will not be coming to Pennsylvania this year," I told my father during our weekly call. "I am hosting a gathering for friends here in Boston." There was a pause before he responded, "We will miss you." The simple acknowledgement of my absence was itself a change from the guilt trips of the past. However, I continued, "I would like to visit for New Year's instead, if that works for everyone." "I think that would be nice," he said, surprising me with his acceptance of the alternative. As December 25th approached, I felt a lightness I had not experienced during the holidays in years. My apartment was decorated with ornaments I had chosen not to fit an aesthetic, but because they brought me joy. Friends would soon fill the space with laughter and genuine affection. And in the new year, I would see my family on terms that respected my autonomy and worth. The journey was far from complete. Family patterns established over decades do not transform overnight. But for the first time, I was moving forward with clarity about who I was and what I deserved, a gift more valuable than any I could have found beneath a Christmas tree. 1 year after the Christmas dinner that changed everything, I stood in my Boston apartment, surrounded by friends, the air filled with laughter and the scent of the holiday meal we had prepared together. My living room was transformed by twinkling lights and decorations that reflected my personal taste rather than someone else's idea of perfection. A painting I had created hung above the fireplace, its vibrant colors capturing the joy I had rediscovered in the past year. To chosen family, my friend Rachel said, raising her glass in a toast, and to Jillian, who taught us all about the power of setting boundaries. To boundaries, everyone echoed, glasses clinking as warm smiles were exchanged across the table. This was the Christmas I had created for myself, filled with people who valued me for exactly who I was. There were no comparisons, no subtle digs disguised as concern, no undercurrent of disapproval. Just genuine connection and the freedom to be fully present without bracing for emotional impact. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down and guests began to leave, my phone rang. The screen showed my father's name, a sight that no longer filled me with dread. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I answered, stepping into my bedroom for privacy. "Merry Christmas, Jillian," he replied, his voice carrying an unusual warmth. "I hope your day has been nice." "It has been wonderful," I said honestly. "Different, but wonderful. How about yours?" "Quieter without you here," he admitted. "But good. Your mother made her usual feast, though she complained that no one appreciates the work involved like you always did." I smiled at the backhanded acknowledgement of my absence. Some things change slowly, if at all. "Dad, I wanted to call for more than holiday wishes." He continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I have been doing a lot of thinking this past year about the things you said last Christmas." I sat on the edge of my bed, heart quickening. "Oh, you were right about a lot of it. The way I took you for granted. The way your contributions were never properly acknowledged." He cleared his throat. "I should have said something when your mother made that comment. I should have said something all the years before that." The admission so long awaited brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that. Now I managed." "I was never good with emotions," he continued. "It was easier to focus on work, on tangible things. But that does not excuse leaving you to bear the brunt of your mother's expectations without support." We talked for nearly an hour, covering ground that had been left untouched for decades. He spoke of his own upbringing in a household where feelings were never discussed, of the pressure he felt to succeed financially, of how he had inadvertently perpetuated those patterns with his own children. "I am proud of you, Jillian," he said near the end of our conversation. "Not just for your career success, though that is impressive, but for having the courage to break patterns that I could not." After we hung up, I rejoined my remaining guests with a new lightness in my chest. The call was not a magical resolution to years of family dysfunction, but it was a significant step toward healing. The following week, I flew to Pennsylvania for New Year's as planned. The visit was markedly different from any previous family gathering. I stayed at a hotel, maintaining the personal space that had become essential to my well-being. My interactions with family were governed by the boundaries I had established, and surprisingly largely respected. My mother remained the most resistant to change, still prone to comparative comments and criticism. But even she seemed subdued, watching me interact with Jason and Melanie with an expression I could not quite interpret. The most notable difference was in my siblings. Jason, who had spent the year struggling with the financial independence forced by my boundaries, had developed a new level of responsibility. He proudly announced that his business loan was being paid on schedule and that he had hired an actual accountant. I should have done it years ago instead of taking the easy route, he admitted during a private moment. You were right about that. Melanie, who had always been so focused on her own achievements, asked detailed questions about my latest work project and actually listened to the answers. When she began to slip into her usual pattern of one-upping, she caught herself mid-sentence and redirected the conversation. Sorry, she said, with a self-conscious laugh. Old habits. They die hard, I agreed, appreciating the effort, even when it was imperfect. The most surprising moment came on New Year's Eve, just before midnight. When my mother approached me as I stood alone on the porch, taking a break from the gathering inside. Your Aunt Patricia tells me you have been painting again, she said, her breath visible in the cold air. Yes, I replied cautiously. I joined a class last spring. She nodded, looking out at the snow-covered yard rather than at me. You always had talent for it. I should have encouraged that more. The admission, small as it was, represented a seismic shift in our relationship. Not an apology, not a complete recognition of past wrongs, but an acknowledgement of something positive in me that had nothing to do with my usefulness to others. Thank you, I said simply. We stood in silence until she spoke again. This past year has been difficult for me, Jillian. Having a child step away from the family, especially so publicly. I tensed, waiting for the guilt trip that usually followed such statements. But she continued, surprising me. I have had to reconsider some things. Your father has been quite insistent about that. Reconsider what things, I asked when she did not elaborate. She sighed deeply. Whether I have been fair in my assessment of your choices. Whether my expectations have been reasonable. Coming from my mother, this was the equivalent of a profound apology. I felt a complicated mix of emotions, validation, fighting with the lingering hurt of years of criticism. I cannot promise I will change overnight, she added, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. But I would like to try to understand your life better, if you are willing. As the countdown to midnight began inside, we stood together in a moment of fragile potential. Not reconciliation, not yet, but the possibility of a new beginning. I would like that too, I said finally. Returning to Boston after the New Year's visit, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 12 months. The painful confrontation at last year's Christmas dinner had been a breaking point, but also a breakthrough. By standing up for myself in that moment of raw truth, I had set in motion changes that affected not just my relationship with my family, but my entire approach to life. In therapy, I continued to work through the deeply ingrained patterns that had shaped my self-perception. The tendency to seek validation through usefulness to others. The habit of minimizing my own achievements. The belief that love was conditional upon meeting others' expectations. The work you have done this year is remarkable, Dr. Warner said during our final session before she relocated to another state. But remember that healing is not linear. There will still be difficult moments with your family, moments when old patterns reassert themselves. I know, I acknowledged, but now I have tools to recognize those patterns and respond differently. Exactly. And most importantly, you know your worth is not determined by your usefulness to others or their approval of your choices. That fundamental shift in perspective had transformed every aspect of my life. At work, I had continued to advance, no longer hiding my achievements or downplaying my contributions. The leadership role I had hesitated to pursue was now mine, bringing new challenges and satisfactions. My personal life had blossomed as well. The painting class had led to a small exhibition of my work at a local gallery. The friendships I had cultivated were deep and nurturing. I had even begun dating someone who appreciated my strength and independence rather than seeing it as a challenge. Most significantly, I had learned to celebrate my own successes without waiting for external validation. The constant seeking of approval that had driven so much of my behavior was gradually being replaced by an internal sense of accomplishment and self-worth. The journey with my family continued to have its ups and downs. My father and I developed a more authentic relationship, finding common ground in discussions of finance and gradually venturing into more personal territory. Jason repaid a portion of his loans and stopped asking for more, a sign of respect I valued more than the money itself. Melanie and I established a more balanced dynamic, though she occasionally slipped back into competitive patterns when stressed. My mother remained the most complex relationship, her deeply ingrained behaviors the most resistant to change. There were still comments that stung, still moments when her approval seemed conditional on conforming to her expectations. But there were also small gestures of effort, brief acknowledgments of my choices as valid if different from what she would have chosen. As another Christmas approached, I made a decision that reflected my new understanding of healthy boundaries. I would spend Christmas Eve and morning in Boston, with my chosen family of friends, then fly to Pennsylvania for Christmas dinner, staying just 2 nights before returning home. You get to create traditions that honor both your family connections and your personal needs. My new therapist, Dr. Marcos, affirmed when I discussed the plan with him. That is not selfish, it is healthy. The balanced approach felt right, allowing me to maintain the connections that mattered while protecting the sense of self I had worked so hard to develop. Looking back on the painful Christmas confrontation that had catalyzed so much change, I realized that standing up for myself had been an act of love not just for me, but ultimately for my family as well. By refusing to participate in harmful patterns, I had created the possibility of healthier relationships for everyone. The words that had once wounded me so deeply, "You are the most useless child we have," no longer held power over me. I knew with certainty that my worth was not measured by my usefulness to others, my conformity to their expectations, or my willingness to silence my own needs. True family, whether biological or chosen, was built on mutual respect, genuine interest, and unconditional acceptance. It had taken 32 years and one devastating Christmas dinner for me to learn that lesson, but the freedom it brought was worth every difficult moment of the journey. As I prepare to share this story with all of you, I wonder if any of you have experienced similar family dynamics. Have you ever had to stand up to toxic patterns or set boundaries with loved ones? What helped you find the courage to speak your truth? Please share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more stories about finding strength through difficult life lessons. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth is never determined by your usefulness to others. Wishing you all the courage to honor your own value today and every day.